From training to performing, join our big league conversation. Welcome to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast with your host, Eric Cressey.
Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Cressey, and this is episode 30. We've got an awesome show today with an MLB veteran who's got experience as both a position player and a pitcher. He's got an awesome story to tell. He's a great friend and neighbor of mine as well, so you're really in for a treat. Today's episode is brought to you by Mark Pro. If you're a baseball pitcher, you know that keeping your arm healthy is essential. But with high training volumes on top of games, that's not always easy. Overuse is a significant problem for players at every level of baseball right now. Certainly, we see shoulder and elbow injuries as some of the most common overuse injuries in baseball. And as an example, at the professional level, a UCL injury can result in an average of 17.2 months out of competition. That's a huge deal also if you're a young player and you miss out on a lot of development. So really, at the end of the day, there are three ways that we can combat overuse. First, you can reduce the workload, and certainly there's been a lot of research out there on pitch counts. Second, and this is the theme of these podcasts, is that you can build a significant level of strength and fitness to prepare yourself. However, a third key approach that's often overlooked is that you can work to improve your recovery so that you can safely display your fitness day in and day out. And that's really where the Mark Pro is an effective tool. Some athletes will even use it to warm up their arms before they throw as well. Mark Pro is a cutting-edge EMS device that uses patented technology to create non-fatiguing muscle activation, and this is what separates it from other recovery tools. Muscle activation with Mark Pro facilitates each stage of the body's natural recovery process, similar to active recovery, but without the extra muscular effort and fatigue. Athletes can use it for as long as they need to ensure a more full and quick recovery in between training or games. With its portability and ease of use, players can use Mark Pro while traveling between games or while relaxing at home. We have players that use it all the time on team flights to bounce back while they're just chilling on that flight. We have plenty of pro guys that use this. In fact, every ML team and over 200 pro pitchers are regularly using Mark Pro. Put it to the test for yourself now with their new Try Before You Buy program, and you can use the promo code Cressey at checkout for 10% off at markpro.com. Again, that's Cressey, Cressey, at checkout for 10% off at markpro.com, markpro.com. Today's guest was a left-handed pitcher drafted by the St. Louis Cardinals in the second round of the 1997 Major League Baseball draft. He quickly ascended through the Cardinals system to make his Major League debut in 1999 at age 20. In his rookie year, he finished second in the National League in both strikeouts per 9 innings and fewest hits allowed per 9 innings. He finished second in the National League Rookie of the Year voting as well. The following year, he was given the ball in Game 1 of the National League Divisional Series. During that appearance, he lost command of his pitches in a performance that has become the most documented case of the yips in Major League history. After trying to regain his pitching form in the minor leagues, including a Tommy John surgery, he returned to the majors as a pitcher in 2004. After continued challenging his throwing strikes in the spring of 2005, he announced that he was switching to the outfield. For 2.5 years, he honed his skills as a hitter and fielder in the Cardinals minor league system, and actually made it back to the big leagues with the Cardinals in 2007. Over the next 7 seasons, he was a Major League Baseball regular in the outfield for the Royals, Braves, Nationals, Astros, and Mets. He retired after the 2013 season with 76 career home runs and 251 RBIs, plus some of the most impressive outfield defense highlights in Major League history. He became the first player since Babe Ruth to have won at least 10 games as a pitcher and also hit at least 50 home runs. He's the only player other than Ruth to start both a postseason game as a pitcher and hit a home run in the postseason as a position player. Following his retirement, the Washington Nationals announced that they had hired him as a life skills coordinator to mentor players at both the major and minor league levels. In April 2017, his memoir, The Phenomenon, Pressure, the Yips, and the Pitch That Changed My Life, was published. He also broadcast Cardinals games for Fox Sports, and you can check out a documentary on his story that was just launched in the past week on Fox Sports 1. On a personal level, he and his wife, Lori, are neighbors, close friends, and gym regulars at Cressey Sports Performance, Florida, and I've gotten to know him well enough to realize that this is an amazing story that's going to make for an awesome podcast. Please welcome to the show, Rick Ankiel. Welcome to the show, Rick.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It seems kind of silly to welcome you to the show when I live like 5 doors down from you, but we're going to make this seem really formal, right?
I'm standing right outside of your house right now, but you're not home.
All right, man. So first off, for everybody listening, there's a new documentary out. It's on Players Tribune, and it's also going to be featured on Fox Sports during the playoffs, correct?
Correct.
All right. So everybody should be familiar with your story because it's an awesome one, and HBO has done some stuff on it in the past, and the book, The Phenomenon, was outstanding. I've talked about that in the past on my website, but if you guys have not heard that, you definitely need to check it out. Cause we're going to kind of build on some of those stories. So definitely look into those if you haven't seen them already. So I think a cool place to start with kind of this discussion of, where the yips or whatever you want to call them were back in the day and where they are now was actually a really good quote from your book. So I'm going to read it to you, and I want to kind of like create a little bit of frame of reference for it and get your take on it. It says, I was not hurt. I was not afraid. I was not sick or distracted or particularly anxious. There was no terrible accident. That said, days on ball fields don't generally come much worse. In game 1 of the National League Divisional Series, on a warm and sunny afternoon with a slight cross breeze, in front of exactly 52,378 people, including my mom, I stood on the mound at Busch Stadium, convinced I would be great. That was my destiny. And then I was not great. I don't know why. I only know what happened and what it did to me, or what I did to it, as I'm sure there's a conversation to be had about that, where it led me and where it has left me. So when I read that line, it's just kind of like a good reminder, like these issues don't discriminate. It really can happen to absolutely everybody. You are a generational arm. Has that been your experience? Like, what's your take when you hear that read back to you?
It absolutely is. When I was young, I think I was the kid that everybody would have looked at and been like, there's no way that'll happen to, because I walked with the confidence. I pitched with a certain confidence. I knew how good I was. I knew where I wanted to go, and I was on that path. Mm-hmm. Certainly Tony La Russa naming me game 1 starter of that game, I think speaks to that. In my talking to Steve Blass, Chuck Knobloch, you go around and around with other guys who've went through it. I've never been able to find a common denominator that puts everyone in the same category, right? Steve Blass came up from a good childhood, so you can't really relate that to mine. It just seems like you're saying, it doesn't discriminate. But I would say one thing that it does happen to is the good guys. The bad guys that don't really care, seems like it never happens to, and the guys that care are the ones that it happens to.
Absolutely. Do you think there's something to be said for that? Like they almost care so much that they have a tendency to become more internally focused as opposed to externally focused, or what's your take?
Yeah, I do. Because I think that when you care, right, you care about everyone else. Also, not that that's a bad thing, but sometimes, little things like that, whether, in my game specifically, whether I threw a wild pitch and, thinking, man, I just threw a wild pitch on TV, and you're wondering what everybody else is thinking, or if you're wondering that you're starting to let down your team and then it starts to manifest. Certainly you can see that it would add to it versus someone who's like, oh, well, who cares? It doesn't matter.
Yeah. And here's a question I have for you is so you use a photocopy machine, right? And they say you're Xeroxing paper, right? Mm-hmm. Like to some degree, you've become synonymous with this. Do you think it's because it happened on such a big stage? Do you think it's because it was such a hard hole to try to dig yourself out of? What do you think it was that made your instance so memorable?
I think a few. I think one is what you said. It happened on a national stage. I was baseball's poster boy, right? I was on everything that they put out, so I was that guy. So everybody was tuning in to watch, and then it happened on the playoffs and the big stage. The other one is as I went through it, one thing I think too is that I was with the Cardinals, right? Mm-hmm. One of the greatest, if not the greatest organization that there is. So people care, and that organization is always in the limelight. But once I made the switch to become a hitter, it just brings the story back to surface. Yep. And then I wasn't afraid to talk about it. So we have the book, there's a documentary, they did a small one on HBO. Now there's another one coming out, with the Players Tribune and Fox. So it kept it going. And one of the things that I found when I went through it is that nobody really wants to talk about it. It's this dark, deep thing where no one wants to go. And I felt like, I'm not afraid of this. There's no reason to hide from it. Everybody's seen me go through it. And talking about it actually kind of helps you deal with it and internalize it. So in writing the book, it was very therapeutic. I didn't expect that to happen, but it was. I'm glad I did it. And I think for those reasons is why that my name is synonymous with that.
Absolutely. Do you think it's happening more now in 2019? We certainly hear about it a lot more. Is it because of, scenarios like yours that have maybe made people more aware of it? Or do you think that, we just hear more about it because social media is out there, the popularity of the game is, higher across bigger mediums? What do you think?
I think there's a little bit of everything in that. I think kids have a lot of pressure on them from a very early age, way earlier than they should, with social media, with travel teams, with whatever. And I think almost with anything else negative in life, we hear about so much more negative stuff because of social media, and it gets out there so fast, where before you just didn't. It might have got swept under the rug and you would never have heard of the guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And guys are throwing harder. So more injuries that could theoretically create the perfect storm for them. Like, I know you've done, you're a guy that a lot of people who have struggled with these issues has called over the years. Do you see a lot of scenarios where an injury leads to, an altered arm path and then, not trusting their body and things just kind of snowball to get to this? But I mean, is that a theory that you've seen thrown out there, or where do you think most of these cases are originating?
I think it differs, and that's kind of where it goes. It can be that because really it doesn't matter how it happens. It's all about how you internalize it. So a guy could be injured, he throws a bad pitch or a couple bad pitches, and he starts to think about it, and all of a sudden, because he's injured, he can't get back to the right spot, but it manifests itself mentally, and all of a sudden it's there. And if he doesn't get with the right person or have the right temperament or personality to correct himself, then it can cement itself there as a problem.
Absolutely. Now, one of the other questions about that I was really interested in hearing is, we hear a lot of, like I said, Mike Soroka is one of our guys, and Mike's going to make his first playoff start against the Cardinals in the next couple of days. It looks like, Mike's 21. So there are a lot of people that, certainly hindsight is 2020, look back on your struggles early in their career, and they say, oh, he was rushed to the big leagues. It was too big a stage. Do you buy that? Do you see, a need to protect these guys? And obviously Jack Flaherty's doing amazing things for the Cardinals right now. When you see guys going up and being put on those stages, does it concern you, or do you think it's such a unique case that it's something you can't really apply to that?
No, it doesn't concern me. I mean, obviously you're going to look at each guy and try and figure out who they are, what their personalities are, what they do in big situations. Have they been through adversity yet? And, all the things that'll come with that, making that decision. No, I just think it was a unique situation. Mike Lafini, who was my regular catcher, wasn't the catcher. And going back and rewatching a lot of that game where I just lost it and started throwing balls, there were definitely some balls in there that would have been caught. And Mike cut his hand. That's not his fault. And you never know if those balls are caught, if you're able to keep throwing strikes. Or does this happen later on in my career somewhere? You just don't know where it came from. Was it manifesting itself in there forever and waiting to come get me? I don't know. That's the unanswered question. And I wish that with all the science that's coming out, the biomarkers when we're testing blood and certain genes and this and that maybe we can find something that says this guy may be prone to that, and let's pay attention and get him down the right path of whether it be mental training, self-talk, or whatever, just something that could help him. So if the crap does hit the fan, he knows what to do and how to do it.
Absolutely. And I guess in that same vein, I think I know the answer to this, but it's probably going to be good to hear for you, to expand upon it a little bit. But you worked as a mental skills coach with the Washington Nationals for a bit after you retired. And do you think there's a place proactively, right, for giving young guys strategies, not just to deal with baseball, but also like, hey, if you're, a first round draft pick at age 18 and you get life changing money, like how to handle that? Do you think the organizations in general are better now than they were then about nurturing that 18 to 22-year-old athlete so that they are more positioned for success? Or do you think that it's actually it's headed in the wrong direction?
No, I think 1,000% is going in the right direction. And that, I would say, is in general for men in general. Back then, it's just kind of a taboo thing for men or athletes to seek mental help. And sometimes you can go to a therapist to better yourself, not because you're having an issue, but to make your mental game that much better. So I think it's definitely moving in a better direction. And when you watch sports, not just baseball, all sports, it seems every organization has a therapist, has somebody there for mental coaching, if not multiple people, to get these guys. They realize that they're investing millions of dollars in these guys. These guys are their future, and why not put all the steps that are there possible to make them successful?
Absolutely. And when you had the initial struggles, right, what was your experience? Was it that nobody wanted to talk to you? Was it that you had too many people in your ear trying to tell you exactly what you needed to do to fix it? What was your impression in the moment?
It's a little bit of both. It's an interesting, strange dynamic and a weird place to be. One is all of a sudden you're thrust from being, the greatest pitcher on the planet or to becoming one to all of a sudden you feel the sympathy around you. You're getting so much advice from everyone that your head is spinning, right? And you're not even sure what's going wrong. And you're not even sure how to ask questions that you're being asked, So it was both definitely. And I think one thing that if anyone's going through it, or even if you're just going through a regular slump, right? You have to pick people you trust and you have to narrow it down and keep it there because you cannot take advice from 400 different people and be successful. It just won't work.
Absolutely. And is there advice there in the context of when you're age 18, you get to pro ball, establish who those 4 or 5 people that you really trust the most are?
I think so. I mean, I think a lot of guys, not all, but most have a good feeling of who's there for the right reasons and the wrong reasons. Most guys can sense that. But, when you're talking about agents that are involved and the organizations that are involved and they're putting those people in place, you have to put some of that responsibility on them because they're drafting this guy, they're paying that guy. It's their investment. And you hope that they're putting the right people in the right place in case he doesn't already have it there.
Yeah. And let's maybe put yourself back in the shoes you had. If you're a player who's dealing with this, right? You're a 19-year-old college freshman who all of a sudden is struggling with something in this vein. Like, where do you start? What is step one? Just recognizing that there actually is a problem and all that, or what's your take on the ones that you've encountered? Because I know you throw with a fair amount of guys who have gone through this and help them work through it.
I think one is, you have to acknowledge it, right? If you don't, you're never going to go get help. You're going to be in denial and keep blaming it on something else. So first you have to do that. And then second, you're going to want to reach out to the right people. Reach out to a therapist that's trained, or someone who's been through it before, me, or, if there's other people out there, obviously you can Google on the internet.
Yep.
I would go to your coaches. It's a tricky thing though, because there is an ego side to it. It's embarrassing and maybe you don't want to talk about it and it's hard, but remember, a lot of times, if you keep trying to beat that on your own, you're probably not going to get there. And the deeper it gets, the harder it is to go over it. So that as soon as you think that there's something there, I would go try to find help.
Absolutely. And then, that's the player, but what about like a coach, right? Cause that's a hard dynamic. It's not an easy conversation to just go to. It's, like we always hear about like female coaches in our industry, right? Who may have a young athlete who has an eating disorder. It's like, do you speak up? Do you talk about it? Do you hope it gets better? And it's, these things that you're really careful about approaching. And I think this is one in the baseball, world that maybe is a good parallel. Where does a coach start when something like this is going amiss?
Well, I think I'm going to start with, the people that I trust, right? Everybody has someone they lean on. If it was me, I'm calling that person and saying, this is what I have. What do you think I do? And whether it's somebody with inside the college campus or somebody outside, I think you got to find those steps, and that's different for everyone and what place they are and where you would call. I mean, certainly they could call you, know everyone, and have those contacts too. But that would be that's the way I would handle it.
There's a saying, I actually heard it from a pro boxer we trained for the first time, and it's resonated with me for a long time. He said, when you win, everyone wins, and when you lose alone. So in the context of teammates, what was your experience like, how your teammates handled it in the moment, and what can a teammate of a guy who's really struggling on this front do to kind of work them or help them work through it?
I think you put your arm around them and you let them know that you're there for them, and you see where that goes, because you never know how it's different with everyone. I think you do your best to protect them from the media. Certainly my teammates did that. Just sometimes it was just so out of hand with 45 cameras when I'm trying to play catch. And certainly my teammates did support me in the fact that they were like, listen, can you just let him play catch? We're not in a game. We're just trying to practice. Can you let him work on it without, you guys just forcing this down his throat? I just think you support him in every way possible and go from there. Cause you never know when he's going to, I know a lot of times for me, or there was definitely a few times where, Craig Biggio, Jeff Bagwell come to mind. We were playing in the Astros and I had a tough game there I was going through it. This was 2001, the year after it started. And both of them walked by and said, "Hey man, keep your head up, man. We're rooting for you." And the one thing that they didn't know was I was about to quit. And those little comments right there just kept me going and kept me forcing it. So it's just that pat on the butt, that arm around the shoulder, keep going. Everybody's been there, whatever, just a supportive statement, because you never know how far that might go.
There's kind of like an interesting parallel. I remember Sheryl Sandberg is kind of a higher up at Facebook. She wrote a book called Option B, which was about when her husband passed away, and she talked about how like none of her friends spoke to her, like that they never knew what to say, so they said nothing. And there's something to be said about at least volunteering encouragement and helping people along, even if you're not trying to give advice or anything like that. Just support can go a long way.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's simple as a question. Hey, listen, man, this is a tough situation. I'm not even sure what to say. What can I do to help you?
Absolutely.
Because that's the easiest way to do it. What can I do to help you? And I know it's like, man, I don't know if I should bring it up because they're emotional, this and that. But listen, you don't know how close they are to, who knows, right? They could be close to taking their own life if it's that deep or wherever. So I think the simplest thing is there anything I can do to help you? Please, let me know.
What's the biggest misconception about the yips that you've seen over the years?
What do you mean by that?
I mean, like, there are people that assume it's always a physical issue, right? There are some people that think, that someone automatically has tons of problems off the field or something like that. Or are there things that you hear, muttered where you just kind of roll your eyes and like they have no idea what's actually going on?
I think I think what people don't realize is that it consumes you. It's 24/7. And I don't know if they understand how deep that goes, because most of the time when you're talking, especially about professional athletes and even maybe lower in the high school, collegiate level, everybody's obsessed, right? You wake up thinking about baseball. All day you're thinking about baseball. You go to bed thinking about baseball. You go to bed thinking about how I can be the better player. How am I going to be better tomorrow? How am I going to make it to the big leagues? How am I going to stay in the big leagues? So when something like this happens, you get destroyed. Your soul is sucked out of you, and you're still thinking about it, but it's driving you mad. That would definitely be one. And then the other would be, I think that people think that it just happens to people that are weak, and that's not the case. It just can manifest itself somehow in some way and, really become an issue.
Absolutely. And so people forget that you made a comeback as a pitcher before you made the switch to hitting, which in and of itself is an amazing story. It's hard to make it the big leagues, period. You did it as both a position player and a pitcher. When you made that return as a pitcher, what were the things that were the most impactful for you? You spoke about it at length in the book, but it'd be cool to get kind of a summary here.
Yeah, making it back in itself was a big feat, but the one thing that I'll say about the yips is it never goes away. It never goes away. You just learn how to deal with it, and that's the hardest thing about it. So when I did make it back, I was pitching successfully, definitely good enough to make a ball club, but I wasn't that young, I don't give a crap guy, confidence through the roof, throwing 100 miles an hour. It just didn't go that way for me. Now everyone's different. But in making it back, it seemed like the mental routine that I needed to do every day, 24/7, around the clock, just to go out there and play catch or go out there and compete during the game, was so exhausting. Don't get me wrong. I was so happy that I made moving into 2005, the year after. It was so exhausting that I understood that I didn't think that, playing baseball would be worth it if that's what it was going to be for the next 5, 6 years, 8, 10, whatever it was going to be.
And, if you could go back in hindsight, and I think that's maybe an unfair question to ask, but, what would you have done differently, in kind of the late teenage years, kind of in that 18 to 22 range, to try to effectively offset what wound up happening? Would you have been more proactive in terms of working with a mental skills coach before this started? Would you have done something different with your preparation? What would you, in hindsight, what advice would you give to a teenage Rick Ankiel?
I think the advice would be to go and start that work with a mental coach already, right? I want to know what this is about and know how I can make myself better. The funny thing about it was, without being taught, I was already doing that stuff, but I didn't know how to handle adversity, right? Because I'd never been through it, but I was doing it on a level of how my self-talk was amazing, because, once I learned it all, I was like, I was doing that in high school. But what I would do is understand what to do and what to say to myself when things start going wrong, and how to keep myself focused and understand. For me, it's the KISS method, right? Keep it simple, stupid. So you want to break it down into its simplest form. So what's a pitcher's job? A pitcher's job is to take a baseball and throw it at a target with hard, late breaking movement. So my job would be, okay, I'm going to take this baseball and hit this target and just keep it at that, right? Okay, here I go. I'm going to drill this ball down and away. Whatever my target is, I'm going to drill, destroy this ball up and in, whatever the language I want to use, but just keep it simple like that. And when I pitch games, let's say I throw 100 pitches, the way I'm going to evaluate myself, it's not going to be about results because we're such a result-orientated world. It's just what happens. But I'm going to evaluate myself on if I threw 100 pitches, how many times did I hit my spot? And I don't want to give myself a bunch of leeway. I want to treat it like shooting sporting clays. Either you hit the spot or you don't. Did he move his glove or did he not? Mm-hmm. And that way I'll be like, hey, you know what? I was 40 for 100 today. You might be 40 for 100 and throw a great game. You might be 70 for 100 and throw a horse crap game. The point is you can't control that. So I would really want to go back and make sure that I understand that I know what I can control and what I cannot control.
Processes more than outcomes.
Absolutely.
What we see a lot nowadays, right? If you look at the youth circuit, if you're a 17-year-old phenom who's going to be a first-round draft pick, you very rarely struggle. You're always the best player in the history of your town. You're probably the number one recruit to whatever college you're headed towards. Whether you're a position player or a pitcher, you dominate your local competition. And what we see is on top of that, guys, they have the perfect filter on Instagram to make every photo look good, right? You only highlight everything about your life that's outstanding. And so there's a group of athletes that are totally unconditioned to deal with failure. What would you say to that first round draft pick that's just about to get punched in the mouth the second he shows up on a spring training complex and realizes everybody there is the best player in the history of their town? Like, what would you say to prepare with your mental skills background?
First and foremost would be don't make baseball your identity. Baseball is what you do. It's not who you are, right? So you want to have that background and diversity and whatever it may be, like whatever you're interested in, your hobbies are, get good at things, make relationships outside of the game or use your relationships, through your networks or whatever to become, just understand who you are as a person and understand that baseball is just it's not who you are. So that way, if crap did hit the fan or if you're about to get punched in the mouth, it doesn't take your whole life with it, right? It's like, oh, well, I lost today or I didn't have a good day. I'm going to get back on my feet and keep going, right? Here comes the rope-a-doper. So, separate the two and understanding this is what I do. This is who I am.
And you bounced around a few different MLB organizations, after you made the transition. And I'm curious your perspective, particularly, having some skills as a coach yourself. And you're coaching your son's teams now as well. Like, what are some of the characteristics of the coaches that you interacted with across multiple organizations that you feel like were maybe the most impactful for you? Who was able to help you, A, when you weren't going good, and also B, how are they able to help you, in terms of keeping momentum rolling once you got yourself on the right path?
The best coaches, and I had so many, it wouldn't be fair to just name one, were the ones who were really good at communication. And you want to get to know the player, right? You just don't want the player to be another number. So that would be say, hey, we got 100 guys. He's just number 20. Get to know the guy. Where's he from? What's his background? Does he have a brother? Does he have a sister? Right? So you start to build that relationship with them. And then the communication becomes much easier. I think some coaches are so afraid maybe to get to know the guy. And then you see people who are really afraid to lose their jobs where they might see something you're doing wrong. And if you're a big high prospect, they're almost afraid to change you or give you advice because if that doesn't work, they may get fired. I think trust your instincts as a coach. You were hired for a reason. And just be there to support the guys. I don't think you can go into it with the fear of I'm going to lose this job. You have to go into it with they hired me to be here. I have talents. I'm going to use my skill sets to try to help everyone that I work with, build relationships, be there to support them, kick them in the butt when they need it. You're going to figure that out as you go because you're in the arena with them every day. So you'll know.
No doubt about it. And what about like your, who's your favorite teammate of all time and why? Like who do you look back on as the most helpful for you?
Oh my gosh. That's an unfair question too. Yeah, there's so many. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'll just start where it started. So Darryl Kyle, when I got to the big leagues, just took me under his wing. He was a veteran pitcher. He had a family, but he completely taught me how to be a professional, what it meant to wear the organization's jersey on my chest, what it meant to wear Cardinals across my chest. How just any and everything. I was so green from just a little town in Florida and, going to a big city could be daunting and overwhelming. Who to tip, why we tipped them, whether it's, one day I walked down with my bag, to the bus and he's like, hey, if you're going to do that, you still tip the bad guy. These guys, you're a professional. This is what they do. That's their job. We're pros. This is how it works. I understand if you were late, you needed to rush down. You couldn't wait for them to come. You still walk over and tip them. So little things like that just make you a classy individual.
Yep.
So I'll just stick with that. And then throughout the years, I mean, I've had so many funny and great teammates. I don't think it'd be fair to go into that, but so I'll just stick with Daryl Kyle because he showed me what it was to be a pro.
That's an interesting one. I don't know if you've seen it in the media that just came out. Danny Duffy was very, it took a big step of kind of a great leap of faith to actually reveal it that, effectively he got bullied by some veteran teammates, like when he first came to the big leagues. And I remember talking to Matt Duffy, and even Joe Panic, like in the past about like the culture that they had when those guys came up when they were really young and people took them under their wing. And obviously the Giants, created a culture where those guys thrived in World Series early on. Do you think there's the unwritten rules almost need to become written for a lot of those veterans taking younger guys under their wing, particularly in the context of mental skills becoming that much more prevalent as a coaching strategy in professional organizations?
Yeah, and I think in some it does. And I'll start with Cardinals because Daryl Kyle, I felt like when I got there was that guy, and Pat Hankin was there, and he was a veteran. And it just kept getting passed down, and now you have Adam Wainwright who's there, passing that down to the young guys because I can say this, when I was with the Nationals, there wasn't any veterans there, especially as far as the pitching staff, and you had Steven Strasburg and all these young guys who just came out of college, no idea what to do in the big leagues, and there wasn't even really a pitching plan. Nothing compared to what the Cardinals was. No idea of why I'm throwing this curveball here or what I'm doing here, how to act on and off the field, whether it's lifting during a game, which to me is a no-no. You don't do that. You're on the bench with your guys. Just all those little things that make a team and bring culture and bring everyone together. So yes, and I think the smartest organizations do that. The Cubs. I've heard stories of Theo, and I heard he did it when he was in Boston, gave maybe a certain veteran player a credit card and said, when we get to a city, I want you to take everyone to dinner. I want everyone to be together. I don't care. Just give me this, the bill will be taken care of at the end of the year. Don't worry about it. So that way you are building that culture and you're having guys talk about the game and what they went through and keeping everyone together. So I do. Yes.
Well, for you, which one was harder to prepare for, the pitching or the hitting side of things? What was your experience?
Oh, the hitting.
Yeah. Because it's every day.
Yeah, it's every day. And just listen, my talents as a pitcher were through the roof. Mm-hmm. And listen, I could hit, but I was never who I was as a pitcher. Like that, it's just, I don't get me wrong, I was a good player. But it was just easier, and it was different because when I was young and I was pitching, I was so full of vigor and here we go that it didn't matter. I knew my stuff was better than you, and I was going to strike you out. I didn't care who you were. As a hitter, I would go through that, maybe a week span of that where you're feeling the flow, but the preparation, keeping your body healthy, paying attention to it because it's every single day. You don't have the 4 days off because I was a starting pitcher. You have the 4 days off between your starts typically. The hitting thing, taking care of your body was a whole different deal. But it was a different dynamic in general. But for me, hitting was tough.
Absolutely. Now, here's a question I had for you that you're probably the only person on the planet who really could ever answer this question. Obviously, you went both ways as both a hitter and a pitcher. But, if I look at the videos, like, don't get me wrong, the HBO Real Sports documentary was awesome. I'm sure the ones that are come out. If I'm watching, like, Rick Ankiel highlight reels, I'm watching, like, the throws in Colorado in the outfield. And those were fascinating to me because people forget that you had a Tommy John as you worked your way back from the yips. You tried to throw through it and work your way along and wound up blowing your elbow. So you were an elite arm speed center fielder with coming back from a Tommy John. What for you was helpful in terms of carrying all that velocity from the mound over to the outfield? Like, were you a huge long toss guy? Were you aggressive with pulled arm throws, or was it just always there? You were generational arm.
All right, so let me ask you this, because so I was a huge long toss guy. Mm-hmm. I mean, huge. But I don't know how much different it is beyond the angle of it when you talk about pulled on throws, because I say it like this. I would crow hop and throw it as hard as I could. And typically if I was staying on the right field line, I'd have a guy he'd move as far as he could back, and then he would start having to move towards the left field line to give me more room. Yep. And I would just start throwing the ball out of the stadium or out over the field and into the fence. But my point is that I'm crow hopping and throwing it as hard as I can. So with the pull down throw, right? What would be the difference? The angle of letting it go.
Yep. I mean,
okay.
Yeah, there's a little bit. I mean, I think, if you talk to like Alan Jaeger, Alan talks a lot about like impress me on the way in, not the way out. So the way out is kind of like, you put some arc under it. It's more of like building range of motion. And then the way back down in is taking that range of motion and syncing it up with intent. But I see what you're saying though, for sure.
Okay, so hold on. So I did the exact same thing.
Yep.
So I would stretch these guys out to as far as they could go. And then once they started to come in, now my throws were on a line, right? And now here it comes. I tried to hit you in the ankle and it spin, you'd backspin it and come up and hit you in the chest. But that's the exact same thing. So that's the exact same thing that I did. So I was a big proponent of that.
How often would you do that as an outfielder in season?
So it was usually probably 3 to 4 days a week, and that just depends on how my arm felt because that was the long toss. So that was before BP. During BP, I'm throwing to base, throwing to second base also. I did that every single day. Maybe it was only 10 throws. I'd one hop the first maybe 6 or 7 throws. And then I would let the last 3 go to where, the throw was strong enough to where I could have threw it to home. I could have threw it all the way to third. It didn't matter. But those last 3, I would just let it go. So, but that was at a shorter distance. So it was just paying attention to how my arm felt. And I wanted to make sure I kept stretching it out because when you watch infielders, in my opinion, you see how their arm shortens up and all of a sudden the throws just start only going to first base. If you're a shortstop or third base, instead of going through the first baseman. And I knew as an outfielder to keep carry, meaning I wanted the ball to carry all the way to the bags that I was throwing to when I needed it to. I wanted to keep that arm stretched out and keep making sure that I was throwing through the base, not to the base.
Absolutely. And that's awesome because I think a lot of people just assume you were blessed with like an amazing arm. And don't get me wrong, there probably was an element of that, but it doesn't just stick around forever. Like you actually have to train it. And there are way too many position players who just expect it to be there when they need it. And that's why I always say I love it when like outfielders, infielders, catchers ask me for throwing programs and take a lot of pride in actually doing it. With that in mind, give us, Phil, who are some of the pitchers that you really like to watch today and why?
Let's start with the guy that's throwing tonight.
Absolutely.
Max Scherzer.
Yep.
It's hard not to love this guy, but I love his intent, the intensity. I think when you talk about somebody getting themselves into, I'm going to almost say manic, but focused, right? With intent on making pitches. He might be the best. The other thing is when you watch him and it seems like when he gets to the 5th or the 6th or the 7th, let's call it the 100 and shoot for him could be 110 pitches mark. A lot of guys, you see them start to like fade, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's their legs that get tired, the arm gets tired, a little bit of both, the back gets tired. He seems to be able to dig somewhere deep inside of him into some deep abyss and bring out more level. There's just more in there. We always like to say empty the tank. Well, it seems like he empties the tank and then there's a reserve somewhere and he can empty another one. So, I would say he's probably one of my favorites, maybe if not the favorite. And then the newcomer for the Cardinals is Jack Flaherty.
Yeah.
I work with the Cardinals. I work on TV. I get a chance to, see this guy pitch a lot. His intensity is I would say it's just as intense, but less noticeable. And what you'll notice about him is how in control his mechanics are. And that's even from pitch one. Cause with pitchers, right? When you get out there, especially in a big moment or a big game, that first inning and those first few, you can see them, their mechanics are sped up. But he is just so in control. And that's really just speaks to his preparation and everything I said about Max, the same thing. For me, it's about these guys' preparation. They know how to prepare. They take it very seriously. They don't take days off, especially when they're throwing a side pin. They elevate themselves into that game mode. So every time that they're practicing is just like throwing in a game. So I'll just stick with those.
Those
three.
are really good ones. What about on the hitting side of things? Because you could speak both languages. We gotta leverage all your expertise here.
Yeah. No, man. There's so many good young hitters out there right now. It is incredible to me how these guys are able to come up and do what they're doing. Now, granted, I understand that the ball's flying farther, but it's just amazing me. I mean, you talk about Acuna Jr., I can go to Colton Wong with the Cardinals. I can go around the Astros. You go around Jose Altuve, Jordan Alvarez, the new kid. Then we go out to the Dodgers and Cody Bellinger as a fellow lefty. It amazes me like how tall he stands and he's able to get that uppercut swing. And I know it's all about launch angle, but he's got a big one. But he's still able to get to high pitches and adjust and pitches that are in off the plate and keep them fair. My favorite type of hitter to watch, though, is not just the home run hitters, but are the guys that can hit for average too. And this year, one of my friends, Anthony Rendon, I think he has been the best. Obviously, the stats say so. But when there's a runner in scoring position, you see him really slow it down, and he'll take that base hit the other way because he understands that it's about getting that RBI, helping the team out, not just hitting bombs all the time and being that guy. So that'd be my list there.
Most underrated player in baseball. And I don't just say that like my opinion. I think that was actually voted on The Athletic. They had a good article about it. So, what about like the outfield side of things? Cause that's a hard thing to really truly appreciate. Like, who do you like to watch and what should our listeners look for, in the outfielders that they actually follow?
For me, it's about guys that are paying attention to every single pitch.
Yep.
And guys that don't take plays off. And you can notice it quickly, especially after a bad at bat. A bad at bat happens, and they go out there and their mind's somewhere else, and they're just dogging it. Well, there's two sides to the game, right? You got to be offensive, and you got to be defensive, and you need to be paying attention to everything in between. I think Harrison Bader, Robles in Washington, Victor Robles.
Yep.
I think what's most impressive about him to me is I've had a chance, and I know a lot of guys in Washington, but it's his want to get better. And this kid is very young, very talented, very fast. He is out there every day doing his drills, trying to get better, trying to be the best player that he can be. And he understands that that's what it takes. So for me, it's the guys that do all the little things right. And when you are good defensively, and it does take the work. It just doesn't happen by accident. So for me, it's watching the guys that do it right.
I'm curious, actually, my last question for you. Obviously, you're in the broadcast booth now. What's been the hardest adjustment for you? I know Will Middlebrooks, our hitting guy, Will's talked about as he does some stuff for CBS that he never wanted to be that guy that forgot how hard this game was. What's been the biggest adjustment going to the booth?
Well, that's number one.
Yeah.
Number one is don't forget how hard it was. Number two is remember that all these guys, even though they look to appear to have these big giant egos, are as sensitive as they come. Mm-hmm. And that kind of goes hand in hand with it. So when you are going to talk about a play that should be made, you just should preface it with, hey, that's a tough play, but it needs to be made. You could probably ask them. Mm-hmm. The other one is just learning how to have a normal conversation, just like you're talking to a buddy at the bar, or in the gym or whatever, versus sometimes maybe you're trying to say too much, and you kind of get stuck a little bit of maybe using some language that you wouldn't use on TV, and it's a little bit of adjustment just to the cameras and just, trying to be professional, sit upright, all the things they tell you to do while still just having a normal conversation.
Well, there's an important lesson there too, and this is something I'm going to blow some sunshine up your butt here for a second is literally like every time you come to the facility, it's like you're running for governor. Like everybody loves Rick Ankiel. It doesn't matter whether Max is in the middle of a training session or it's Miles Michaelis or, one of the minor league guys you dealt with on the national side of things. Like what's giving you that contagious personality? What makes you such a likable guy that you've been able to like peacefully mesh in every clubhouse you've been in and obviously transition across careers, positions and, going from the field to the booth? Like, are there certain things that you try to do to win people over?
I think the biggest thing is treat people how you want to be treated. One thing that I've learned is I think it's important to tell guys when they're doing something right instead of just always when they're doing something wrong. And so when I see somebody training hard or whatever it is, just crossing their T's and dotting their I's, I make sure to say it. I'm like, hey, man, that's freaking awesome. Well done. And I think it's just the struggles that I've been to because, look, everybody struggles in this game. I don't care how good you are. You're going to get a slice of humble pie. And I think when people look at me, they see it. I think from a pitching standpoint, because I've been told this by other pitchers, they're like, dude, I'm so jealous because I wanted to be a hitter. So I think there's a lot of admiration for that. And I think you just be nice to people. It's not that hard.
Yeah, that's the truth. All right. So folks can find you on Twitter and Instagram. It's the Rick Ankiel. It's 2 E's and the. Give us a little feel for what's coming up. Remind us, it's Players Tribune and what else?
Fox. So the documentary will be on Fox.
Okay.
I haven't got the schedule from them yet, but it should be the 4th or 5th of this month. So looking forward to it. And then, as we mentioned before, I'm still with Fox Midwest. So I'll be at the Atlanta Braves games here Thursday and Friday with my kids and then flying to St. Louis to work those games.
Nice.
Up there. So looking forward to it. And then obviously blowing sunshine up you for a minute. You'll be back in town by the time I get home, so I get to see you at the gym again.
Absolutely, man. And for those who have not read it, The phenomenal book, New York Times bestseller as well. That is a must read if you're in the baseball world. So definitely check it out. We'll link to all this good stuff in the show notes. Rick, this has been outstanding. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd be thrilled if you'd consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving us a review to read on iTunes. We welcome your suggestions for future guests and questions. Just email elitebaseballpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for your continued support, and we'll see you next episode.